Hello there, welcome back to Soul Sessions.
And today's episode is called The Intoxicating Power of Romantic Love, and we're going to continue our series on myths, which is this myth we're talking about today is Paris and Helen of Troy.
Yes.
One of my favorite movies with Brad Pitt. If you haven't seen it, it's awesome, but it really is such a great myth, and there's so much symbology in it and things we can learn about ourselves.
Yeah. Some people think it's history, and there probably is some history to it, but we're approaching it as part of Greek mythology, the hero's journey. So let's talk a little bit about Jung's approach to mythology so that we kind of frame it in the right context. So Jung actually used the character of Helen in one of his theories, just like Freud used the Oedipus complex in his work. Jung tended to look at myths, especially Greek mythology, as a source of inspiration for his work.
Which inspired Joseph Campbell. A lot of people are familiar with him. Yeah. And the power of myth. So carried on the Jung's work. Yeah,
he did incredible work. I think his library is still at Pacifica University in Santa Barbara, California. Oh, wow. Good. Yeah, they house all his works there. So Jung identified or used the character of Helen as part of the evolution of the Anima. And the Anima, for those of you not familiar with the term, is the countersexual part of a man.
So the feminine aspect of a man that he is not conscious of.
Yes.
Because he thinks he's a man.
Well, a lot of people tend to read it kind of in a social sense of sexuality and gender. But, Jung was talking about archetypal elements of the psyche.
The universal feminine powers.
Yes. And for him, the anima began like at the basic level, the way a man relates to the feminine principle was very much a physical way, which all of us know that as men, we wake up to that sexuality, and that's the first things.
Objectifying the physical aspect.
Well, on both sides, it works on the opposite side as well, right? But it's only a stage of evolution of that relationship or of that understanding of the anima, because he says the next stage is Helen. So first
it would be like a sexual relationship that's purely sexual with a man and woman, and then Helen is more when the person starts having romantic feelings for the woman. That would be the Helen. The anima is activated in that. It's more evolved.
Yes. So the first level would be Eve, naked in the garden, which is a beautiful image, of course. But the second stage would be Helen, which is that romanticized love. And then the third stage would be Mary Magdalene, who for Jung represented kind of more mature, socially engaged love.
She was a part of the mission or the purpose of Jesus's message. And so more like she wasn't just romantic, it was more this kind of bigger purpose, I would say, the human purpose, tying to that type of anima. And then the last stage is Sophia, which is the mother of God, and that's the divine.
Yeah. Sophia translates as wisdom, and so it's the wisdom stage of love.
So for women, we go through these stages. For a man, how he relates to a woman goes through these stages. Like when they're teenagers, they're not thinking romance, they're thinking, wow, my teacher in third grade is really hot all of a sudden, and they're just all going on hormones. And then they get into junior high and they start feeling that getting that first crush and all those things.
Yeah.
And so evolving from there. But let's go back to Anima, the power of the Anima.
Yeah.
And for a man externally, he's connecting with a part of himself.
Yeah, so to paraphrase one of Jung's quotes on the anima, he says the anima on the one hand connects the man to the collective unconscious, to the source of those primal images of the goddess, feminine reproductive power, creativity, the night, the unconscious mind. He says, on the other hand, it also connects him through the emotions to the ever-changing appearance of the external world. So it works in both directions. It connects us to the deeper unconscious mind, the collective unconscious, but also gives us a way to express that in our external life. So it's an important function. He saw this coming to terms with the anima as an important function in both men and women. In women, he saw it as the animus, the spirit within. The anima translates more as the soul. So the soul within a man, the spirit in a woman, is that part of individuation that he called the anima, animus. So when he talked about Helen, and so, we want to read the myth in kind of this context, in the background of this idea that Jung had. Let's look at the story and see what it's talking about.
I'm ready for story time. So once upon a time, there was this prince of Troy who visited Sparta.
That's right.
And he met this beautiful, amazing, intoxicating woman named Helen, who was married to the king of Sparta.
Menelaus.
And he couldn't stop himself. He didn't think rationally. He was like the intoxication of love.
Yeah, he was smitten.
Yeah.
Meaning he was possessed basically by the love that kind of wells up from within, right?
This projection of his anima onto her.
Yeah, when we experience love, it feels like that other person is the one that is projecting or
giving you some kind of feeling, right?
Yeah, kind of giving us that feeling. But it's actually according to Jung, the anima being projected onto that woman.
So what you're actually saying is that we are projecting who we love. So in essence, we, if not examined, it's almost like that, bringing another myth, Cupid, it's like the arrow is just going to shoot wherever and it's going to be random. But we can actually, in Jung's work, find a way to become conscious of this part of ourselves, the anima animus within us, and then we can consciously project so we could choose who we love, in essence, the type of relationship we want. But that didn't happen with Paris, because he would have chosen a Trojan woman and would have solved a lot of problems. So let's go back to the story. He falls in love with Helen. She's the wife of the king of Sparta, they're kind of allies, right? And they were doing some kind of deal.
Not for long.
And not for long.
Yeah, because as he runs or Helen, there's different
where he kidnaps
stories
her,
where it's told.
Did she go willingly?
But she ends up essentially going with Paris. And of course that sets off then the Trojan War, or the fall of Troy. And then most of you know the horse story, where the Trojans build a wooden horse and sneak and kind of use it to sneak into the city past the gates, and therefore the city falls. They
were able to penetrate the inside and then take it down.
Yeah. And of course the story is really rich. We invite you to read it and reread it. But we're focusing on the love story as telling us something about what goes on in relationships. All right, what is the myth talking about as far as what that love, especially at the level of Helen, of the romantic aspect of the anima tells us about relationships. So first of all, it is kind of a very irrational thing to do. And we all know people that are infatuated or not. I don't like to use the word infatuated because it's more than that. It's not like puppy love. It's essentially like a divine experience.
It's like possession.
A divine madness.
It's like a madness that you can't control. Like you know when you fall for someone, it's like, I wish I could not feel for this person. They don't make any logical sense, and it's just this other force that's active within you that defies logic. Like it overrides the logic.
Overrides the logic, and
fear, even like a fear of.
Yes.
Of this is a stranger. I don't know who this person is, but I just want to be with them every day now.
Yes, there's a recklessness to it, right? That the person is willing to risk a lot to hold on to that relationship. And here you see it in Paris, kind of throwing his whole city under the bus.
Including his family.
His father, his brother Hector, the whole city basically, because he wants Helen so badly. And vice versa. Helen is willing to run away or be abducted by Paris, despite knowing, man, the king is going to be pissed off and it's going to make everybody very upset.
But don't you think too that you see men that aren't connected to their anima? They married. This is why a lot of married men or men cheat in a relationship, because they haven't connected, so they crave that romantic feeling, that kind of passion, and so they have to find a new projection for it. And so, do you think that's why men they know they shouldn't cheat on their wife and their kids, and they know it's like so dangerous for them to do, but it's almost like they can't stop? Not all men, but men that aren't connected and grown, they get the anima possesses them, and
it happens on both sides. The story indicates that it's happening on both sides. Yeah. It's not the men don't have a monopoly on
cheating,
on cheating and infatuation.
Well, we're talking about the anima right now,
right?
But that's why, like, people, like, if you've ever been married and your husband wasn't faithful, you think, well, why would he do that? And it's just because this other force is, if they're not conscious of it, it can take over and ruin marriages, ruining lives. Yeah. Women too. They look for that young, like the counterpart to Helen, that young man of like romance, or the younger boy, the younger man, and the dangerous person that's not the kind of predictable, safe husband, and want that adventure, and so.
Oh, yeah. Well, you have a lot to say about that.
I am totally fulfilled. But, if we're not conscious, these forces, what I'm trying to say, like you said, it's both sides. Yeah. They act autonomously through us. They're kind of forces that if we aren't conscious of them, they will basically can ruin our lives, not ruin our lives, but make a mess of things.
No, they can ruin your life.
They can ruin
Absolutely.
Your life.
Love can give you the biggest gift of your life, or it can essentially ruin you emotionally or in many ways, because this is one of Jung's points. The unconscious, especially the archetypes, these archetypes are powerful entities. They're not necessarily separate from us, right? Because they are part of our psyche, but they act as if they take over our life when we're possessed by them, right? And they have a dark side, not a dark side in the sense of evil, but a dark side in the sense that there's elements that we can't control about them. They don't lend themselves to rational thinking, and therefore they're irrational, emotional, which means they make us act in destructive ways according to society and the social norms.
And every rom-com you've ever seen with the hero always like making a fool, and what do you do for love, and so it is this a lot of people just try to understand love from like hormones. Oh, it's just a bunch of hormones. But there's a psychic energy that's within each of us. And if we didn't have the anima animus, or what Jung called the anima animus, this feminine, masculine energy underneath the surface, we would never have that compulsion to connect with another person. Like, besides procreation, why would we want to stay in a relationship? What makes love last? And how do we evolve love from that primal physical experience and the flirty, infatuation experience? How do we bind and stay for a lifetime with someone, or longer term, and deepen that love? And that's really what these elements are. If we can be conscious of them, they could be an asset to us and understand our partner better and ourselves better.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a big hint in the story of Helen that she is from Sparta. Mm-hmm. And Sparta, for those of you that know anything about the culture, is a war culture. Mm-hmm. The Spartans were warriors, and everyone in that tribe was essentially a warrior. Mm-hmm. So she was a warrior. She was not a wallflower waiting to be plucked by a sailor, basically. She was someone to be reckoned with, right? And she got her way, essentially, as this powerful warrior woman or princess. So that's a big hint also, that love
is a battlefield?
Well, that love is powerful.
Yeah.
That it's not like most of us think, these hearts and these little Cupid, these chubby babies. it is a power to be reckoned with, not to be trifled with. But most of us approach it as if it was this beautiful, tender thing.
Fun, yeah. And then when it no longer gets fun, we want to move on. Yeah. We don't want to stick with it.
That's right. That it's going to challenge you. It's going to put you through your pace.
And not only romantic love, but all close relationships when you build a family. I mean, it's tough to be a parent. It's tough to have a parent, life and the people you love that you really bond with, good friends. I mean, it's not easy. I find a lot of times that love comes with that price, that the deeper you love someone, the more you grieve them when they're gone, or whether they leave the relationship or leave at the end of their life. It's like such a deep, profound experience for a human being. But life wouldn't be as colorful and bright if we didn't have it. It would. I mean, you think about your level of love you have for a friend, and then think of a level of love you can have for a partner. It's just a different level. And of course, parent-child is also another level of love. But there's something about that stranger that's not blood, that you don't owe anything to, but you choose to be together. You choose to want to be with that person. And when it's mutual, whew,
that's right.
It can be so powerful, because when two people are awake and conscious and aware of these forces, can you imagine what they can create together?
Yeah.
Changing, have a bigger mission in the world.
Yeah. And you see this in Helen in Paris, right? That they change history. They change the course of armies. They launch 1,000 ships and essentially they end up destroying a whole city, which at that time was like destroying a whole civilization, a whole nation, because they were city-states. They weren't part of a country. Each city was its own country in essence. So the Greeks had a couple of names for love, especially of this kind, of the Helen type. Ludus was this playful flirtiness. It might have started that way, right? That Paris saw Helen.
It was like, how are you doing?
Yeah, and it kind of started to that relationship. And then Eros, which is the erotic, sexual, passionate love, that is what in the West we kind of all think of as the way love is, or the way love should always be. But as we see, there's other stages that are natural progressions of love that nobody teaches us about. So after that initial flirtiness, and then that passionate love, romantic attraction and attachment, there comes like a more pragmatic kind of love, and it was actually called pragma. Pragma was more established, very much like
marriage. Like you're making the commitment to marriage and to be together, and
yes,
it's the romance is. It doesn't mean the romance leaves or the sexual passion leaves. It goes on top of that. Like it's like you're adding layers and building upon what we have versus moving on to a stage.
Yeah, and it was probably meant to rebuild what the initial stage or that Helen stage destroyed.
Yeah.
Because it is about the couple building something new in society, not only in their family or in their relationship, but giving something to society that could help society beyond their relationship. And then finally, Sophia, or that higher stage of wisdom, is agape, meaning the individuals in the relationship, through their love for each other, learn to love humanity and the world. And so that's
like a divine love.
Yeah. It's a much bigger process than just thinking, well, I have to be in this romantic love and in that romantic phase for the rest of my life, or otherwise it's not love.
Yeah, it's. I think a lot of people believe that. They think, well, we've lost that spark, the passion is left to the marriage. How do we bring that passion back? And then it's this manufactured, ooh, I'm going to bring flowers home, and I'm going to take you out to a dinner, or I'm going to give you a spa day, and we'll go away on this adventure to just keep kind of cultivating it. But I think the way it stays in that authentic, natural, authentic romantic is that you do grow and you connect and have a deeper connection to your own animus for women, anima for man. So when you come together, it's like that romance is still there because you're not looking for that other person to be the container for it. You're finding deeper aspects of yourself. I mean, I know for our we've been together for how long? Like almost 20 years. And it always feels fresh because we're always growing. We're always doing our own work. And when two people in a relationship are each doing their own work, each growing, it's never the same person. It's never you're never the same person with them. So there's always that little bit of romance, that little bit of mystery still there. It's not someone there. Claire's been the same way for 20 years, and she's going to make the same meal, and she's going to be in her habits. It's like there's something new to discover about your partner when they're growing and you're growing.
Yeah, so that brings us to this idea of the hero's journey, which the story of Helen and Paris is very much couched in this bigger idea of the Odyssey. From the fall of the city of Troy, then Odysseus goes off on his journey, which becomes the Odyssey, which is essentially the hero's journey. But he plays a trick because Odysseus is very much the trickster and this bigger story.
He's the one who came up with the Trojan horse, the idea, right?
Yes, he kind of comes up with this idea of sneaking into the city in the Trojan horse, which is very much a trickster scene.
Unexpected, like the trickster archetype is those unexpected messing things up when someone's not looking, chaos, a little bit of chaos.
Very much so, very clever, tricky. He kind of pulls a fast one on people and surprises people. So anyway, we see that the myth is always leading to this idea of transformation, of going on a journey of transformation. Now, this is not a literal journey, right? It's an inner journey. In other words, the mythology is talking about the inner process of transformation that's going on in the human psyche. So you always insist on being practical.
Well, I just say, what could they? These ideas are so big, right?
Yeah.
So how do I apply that in my life right now?
Yeah.
My romantic relationships. So what would be the practical? And one of them is to see love as a hero's journey, it's an inner journey, and the other person is basically there to help you, like mirror your inner journey, like where you are. Are you in that sexual type of love? Are you in that romantic kind of love? Is that the only kind of relationships you have? Where does that stop? Do you not have that long term? And if it's long term, does it feel kind of stuck somewhere? Does it need a spiritual element to it? And then as you're willing to look and grow within yourself, that relationship will change, or the type of relationship you fall into will change.
Yeah. So we see the city, the walled city, that represents our mind when we're entrenched in ego, in our own
Fixed
life,
ways.
in our own perspective, in the persona, what Jung would call the persona. Then the war essentially is the disruptive element of transformation.
And I think it's the battle between your divine self wanting to be known, this soul in you or spirit in you wanting to express itself, and the ego saying, no, this conditioning is good. My survival kit, we want to keep it in place. But there's always that trickster element. There's something that interferes or intervenes in your life to wake you up. And so it could be an event or a person, maybe a heartache even, a terrible relationship that just goes horribly wrong. And you start to ask yourself the deeper question, like, what am I doing? Why am I repeating this pattern again and again? So there's that opportunity, but the battle is within yourself. You think you're fighting, the world out there. There's not enough people matching for me, or everyone, the men or women are this way or that way, and you're fighting them, the opposite sex, or fighting society and what's expected of you. But the battle is always within, and I think that's the most important thing to remember, is that whatever's showing up out there, there's an inner conflict within yourself.
Yeah, so what brings the battle to our life is love, right? The desire to connect with another person. In this case, Helen is taken back to Troy and into the walls of the city, meaning the individual takes another person into their heart. But that begins the war, meaning that's going to change everything. You cannot no longer exist as your ego self anymore, because now the war is knocking at your doors.
And you've had that experience with people that when you meet them and you start in a relation, they're like, they changed your life forever. Whether it lasts a short time or a long time, there's something that kind of stirred up something in you that you can never, you're not the same after it.
Yeah, so the war is a transformation. In the symbolic language of dreams and mythologies, war, fire, those kind of elements represent transformation. Judgment Day, basically. And the horse, right, being snuck in represents that kind of sense that we have to be tricked into that transformation, because most of us will not willingly renounce our life, our ego self. We hold on to it because we're attached to it, but something has to make us move from that position. Otherwise we stagnate.
And so we do want, I think I always say the law of the path of least resistance creates the path of least existence. And we want to not look for that like smooth flow all the time. I mean, we're always in battle. That's another thing. We do want those flow moments. But the battle is where we grow. That the conflict is where we change. And love is not about just like you said, the cupids and flowers. It's conflict. I have to make room for this other person who has a completely different way of working, living, thinking, and feeling than me, especially a man and woman relationship, because a lot of it is like conditioned socially of, how do you deal with emotions, how do you communicate, and it's a challenge to after you get through the love and infatuation and the sexual part, which is easy, is how do I really live with someone? How do I make that long-term commitment? Yeah. And that's the battle.
Yeah, and you'll notice most of the world spiritual epics are kind of couched in that context of a war going on. And a lot of people think that it's a literal war that they're talking about. It might be, but it's really representing that internal battle that's going on in us between our animal nature, our lower nature, and our higher nature, our desire to transcend our ego, our physicality, and reach those higher levels of existence.
So for someone on the outside seeing this Paris, Helen, as a tragedy, and it's terrible, but there's something mystical and transformational about it as well, if you see it as a symbolic representation of our own inner journey.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And of course, Hector, the great hero, dies in the battle with Achilles, which is kind of also symbolic of transformation, of sacrifice and all that.
Yes. So next week we'll talk about the last leg is the hero's journey, and more into the hero's journey and the symbolism in pop culture of the heroes and how they undergo their transformation, and how we can be the hero in our life, and for our journey to go for what we really want and experience life to its fullest. So I hope you enjoyed today, and don't forget to subscribe. You can click below if you're on YouTube. If you are listening to us on Spotify or iTunes, please subscribe. Leave a great, not a great if you don't think so, but leave a comment, an honest review. We love those reviews. That helps people find out more about us. And we hope to see you soon.
Stay well.
Take care, everyone.
See you next
Bye-bye.
time.